Awesome. Right. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to the FinOps on Azure podcast. It's Mike Stevenson here from Turbo 360, and today I'm joined by Dustin Mullenix from KPMG. And really great to have you on the show, Dustin. Do you want to just say a few things about yourself and introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And as I might mention later, I've gotten some value out of some of the previous episodes here. So I'm honored to be a guest. So I'm based in the Atlanta area in the southeast part of the U.S., same time zone as New York. I lead a team of FinOps practitioners at KPMG that manages the majority of our internal spend in Azure for our audit line of business. So we do internal FinOps, but we also collaborate pretty frequently with our colleagues in our consulting line of business who are delivering client engagements.
So I think that's a really interesting area there, Dustin, actually, about that differentiation for a company like yourself, where you've got client-facing FinOps and internal FinOps. How do you feel that works, and how do you guys collaborate with each other? Because I guess there's lots of overlaps where you can help each other out, but you actually have a different focus in a way, don't you?
Yeah, so it's pretty fascinating. So the consulting colleagues are delivering FinOps, but they're also delivering other types of engagements. So FinOps for them is one of a few different types of services they deliver. For us, it's all we do. So we've developed some practices and knowledge artifacts that they can take to engagements. But conversely, the way they present information in a very polished setting and format and helps us be better in terms of being organized in our work. So there's some mutual benefit there.
Yeah. Do you have a little bit of competition between the teams as well? I feel like there could be some good opportunities there.
Well, I think one of the things I like about FinOps is that to me, there's so much opportunity that I don't feel much of a zero sum effect.
Mm.
So I think there's so much opportunity that I'm happy to share our insights and what's working for us with other people. We benefit from them, and I think everybody wins.
Yeah, it's really cool. So I think when you first sort of spoke to me, you were quite interested in this topic around the complexity of Azure versus AWS and just your experiences with that. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about what your sort of thoughts are in that space?
Yeah, I think it comes down to it's probably tiers is the area where I would zero in.
Mm.
And I think of managed disks, premium, standard, and then HDD. And then I think of SQL with business critical and general purpose. And those are two areas where I think most companies are probably spending a lot of money. And so right there, that's six different dimensions, 3x2, if you will.
Yeah.
And so and I've heard the joke made, well, why wouldn't an architect pick premium SSD because that person doesn't want to get fired?
Yeah.
Well, if that's done, let's just take that example. If I pick premium SSD to avoid getting called in the middle of the night, when I could have had HDD, I'm roughly paying 3 times what I should. And so I think the tiers are really a critical area where it does add a level of complexity.
I think there's a really good sort of tangent off that one that I've come across quite a few times, where it's not just the architecture choices. Sometimes I think vendors do very templated deployments of applications, and it's kind of, what you want in production isn't necessarily the same as what you want in tests, but actually it's more complex to make them different. So if we just make them the same, then you end up with a simpler DevOps process, but there's a big trade-off that you pay more for it. And I think I've seen that quite a few times as well.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because on the one hand, you could say make them different so that you're not overspending. You do have to understand if that difference is small, if it's a small spend area and it's making your engineers less efficient, well, then
Yeah.
that might be the wrong trade-off. So it's
Yeah.
fascinating. A lot of companies, I think, headcount costs, let's say 4x, but the cloud bill is X. So headcount's more expensive, but you still don't want to be wasting money in the cloud. And so I think it takes a comprehensive view of the cost and the trade-offs to make good decisions.
I think you touched on it well before, isn't it? Where there's all these different parameters, and it's not just the scale out, scale up, which service tier, but there's also like the business context, isn't it? When you bring in that developer cost, and actually if it takes me an extra hour to do something, that might cost way more than what the cloud bill costs. And it's sort of,
Yep.
The secret's to kind of throw all those things together and figure out what the right answer is, isn't it?
It is. And over the summer, we had a pretty significant cost increase, and our team didn't have the full context for it. And so internally, our alarm bells went off. It turns out that it's doing a couple of things. It's moving off of a legacy platform, which was more costly, but it's also adding some key business capabilities. And so our point of view on that went from, oh no, this is bad, to, well, this makes sense, and leadership is okay with the cloud bill increase because of the corresponding business benefits.
Yeah, so it's almost like you had that cost, but it wasn't necessarily planned, you could argue, because you guys didn't know it was coming, but then actually it was a good increase in a way.
Yeah, definitely. And that gets into forecasting and how do you create the right channels of information flowing into your forecast so it should happen and it's not a bad thing.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about it, the scale that you guys work at then. So how, you've got multiple people in a team, but actually you've probably got arguably many teams when you factor the customer side into it. So how do you manage the knowledge around the organization, around FinOps, and kind of help people understand these complexities, like all these different dimensions? Because obviously we just talked about one or two resources there, but there's hundreds of different types. How do you guys kind of manage all that from a knowledge perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it starts with discipline within our team, like making sure that we have a single view of our story on certain efficiency practices. And that can be quite deep. And that's going to be far deeper than our stakeholders need. So then we need to simplify that and have resources for them, whether it's checklists or PDFs. The other thing is we're trying to reduce the knowledge that our stakeholders need. So if certain parameters, such as in dev, should be the norm to avoid wasted spend, well, then can we get those parameters reflected in Terraform templates? So there's what do they need to know, but maybe they don't need to know anything because we can make it transparent to them.
Got you. And that trades on a little bit to kind of people development alongside that knowledge management. So I guess in a big organization, you've got people leave, new people come in. How do you kind of manage, I guess, new people, like new hires, join and training them up, and then how do you manage the FinOps life cycle around people? I guess you bring people into FinOps from elsewhere in the organization as a practice, and then maybe they go on to consulting or something like that.
Yeah, we have a fresh example of this. So as probably one of the most senior people on our team, probably the most senior person on our team, today's her last day. She's making a career change. And so now we had a few months of notice, and so she was able to manage the transition, but she had a lot of knowledge to pass on to less experienced people on our team in other areas. So that's one. But also for us, because KPMG is a large global organization, we're working remotely, and each member firm can do its own thing. Just getting up to speed on who does what in the organization is a big learning curve. But then you also add in, but also you need to learn FinOps. And we had a recent example where we brought in some, people with a couple of years experience in another part of the business. We brought them into FinOps. And Sangeeta, our manager on our Bangalore team, did a tremendous job of helping them learn. And what she did was she would have them do FinOps analysis, and that would help them understand the concepts. Then she would have them document what they did, and that cemented their learning, but it also created knowledge artifacts that we could share. And so that's how we try to approach it. And she's done a really good job. I've actually learned a lot about managing people from watching her.
I always like the people management side of FinOps. Actually, I think it really plays back for me personally back to my history in architecture, where to me architecture was every bit as much about people management and stakeholder management than it was about technology, because you need to know that bit about who does what, who do I speak to about this problem, who's my expert in that area. It kind of resonates really well for me. But do you find on your team, do you find that certain backgrounds are beneficial for people coming into FinOps and certain backgrounds have more of a learning curve?
Yeah, so there's the question in the industry you'll hear posed, is it harder to teach a finance person technology or a technology person finance? Because that's often the background of people in FinOps.
Yeah, yeah.
If I had to guess, I think it's probably harder for finance people to learn the technology. But I've met plenty of technically gifted people who don't like math. Okay, so I think some of it's personal preference as opposed to capability.
Mhm.
But I think I think you can look at this in terms of two categories of what can make a good FinOps practitioner. You can look at it in terms of personality traits, and I would say, are they eager to learn, and are they willing to pursue their own opportunity? Because you find all kinds of things in FinOps, and those you have to have the initiative to explore on your own. In terms of experience, I think you're probably looking for, certainly finance or engineering, but also like project management and operations. So I think you can put it in two categories. And I think if you start getting some of those categories, you can see the raw ingredients that would make a good practitioner.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the benefits, isn't it, of being a big company doing FinOps as well, as you're more likely to have a diverse team of different backgrounds, where a smaller company may only have one person. And I've certainly spoken to many companies where it's one person part-time doing FinOps. But at the bigger scale, you've got all these different backgrounds, which helps everybody learn, I guess, doesn't it?
It does. I'm always fascinated by big high profile companies that for a while, for it seems like for years, their FinOps was run by a senior person that did it on the side of their desk.
Mm,
I'm always fascinated because I don't know how they did that. I've been in
yeah,
a position at a later stage startup where I was the single FinOps person, so I was doing everything. That's obviously great for development, but I think one of the things that makes this easier than it might be in other industries is the FinOps foundation. And you're starting to see, the Azure, AWS, Google, the cloud providers have actively engaged over the last couple of years. And so the amount of resources out there to
yeah.
learn are tremendous. But also in the FinOps Foundation community, the level of transparency people have make it very easy to find somebody who's encountered something similar and quickly learn from them.
Yeah, I think it's very good, isn't it, when you've got a community of people who sort of give back in terms of sharing their experience and knowledge. It kind of helps the next generation of people coming into FinOps who have different backgrounds and encourages them to do the same thing, doesn't it? I think it's a really cool thing about the community.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm really grateful for that dynamic. And it's one of the things that makes me really appreciate working in this field.
Yeah, it's really cool that. So I think one of the things we had on our kind of to-do list of things to talk about was you mentioned some really interesting stuff to me about auto scaling
Hmm.
of various services on Azure. So tell me a little bit about what your thoughts were on that and how that affects the FinOps work you guys do.
Right. So when you just think about native scaling capabilities within Azure, we've encountered, obviously AKS
Mhm.
and App Service Plan has rule-based scaling. But the other day, one of our lead optimization analyst talked about, I think, service bus.
Yeah,
And so he and I, after that conversation, talked, and we, off the top of our heads, came up with 7 or 8, I think, services that we could name within Azure that have a native scaling capability. And each one has its own nuances. And so what that means is it's a non-trivial thing to equip your technical staff to build with those things and use them cost effectively.
yeah, yeah.
And so the challenge is, how do you make the insights accessible without overwhelming people who until recently didn't even think of cost governance as part of their job?
I think it's interesting when you get into some of those service scalings as well, isn't it? When because obviously you've got the auto scaling features, but often they come in. hand in hand with some of the security features as well, because I think it's almost like one of those ones where if you're really small or you're really big, you're at an end of the spectrum where you have a lot of the right features in place. But if you're somewhere in the middle, it's often a bit harder because you have to have a bit of a price jump to get some of the benefits at the top end of the scale. But you often have some of the security requirements that make it difficult to be at the bottom end of the scale. And I know we had a previous podcast with one of my friends, Nino, where we talked about those security versus cost trade-offs, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then the other thing might be redundancy or availability. So we have, for example, ZRS, right, which is in between local redundant and geo-redundant, is not something we take advantage of because it goes against our core principles and designs for availability and uptime.
Yeah. I know there's been some good changes, actually, hasn't there, on app service recently, where they've reduced the number of nodes that you need to have the higher availability options, which is always quite nice. I think it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about some of those options. It's like the decision. I think it's a really common cloud problem, isn't it? The decision we make today doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the right decision in 6 months or a year or 2 years' time, and we've got to kind of think of it as a journey where that decision, we needed 3 nodes for redundancy. Now we only need 2 to get the same level, and that's like a really simplified version of it. But on other services, it's sometimes the changes are more complex, aren't they? But it's keeping up to speed at the end of the day, which touches back on the knowledge management piece.
It does, and then it says, how frequently should I interact with those people? Like, should I schedule a monthly meeting or quarterly? What's the right frequency to get the best result? We're never going to get 100% because there's so much to cover. But how do we wisely use our limited time to get the best result for the business?
Yeah, definitely. We had another thing to talk about. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the value of your cloud spend, which was one of the topics you mentioned earlier as well. I thought was quite interesting.
So this is something. So I try to listen a lot to various platforms and FinOps podcasts. And so, of course, for a few years now, FinOps has been emphasizing business value as part of the story for cloud spend. But listening to a couple of episodes recently, I've been inspired to really zero in on that, and in this fiscal year, help the people we're interacting with think about what the business is getting for a certain amount of spend. And then from there you go into, okay, this is what they're getting. That's the good story. On the bad story, or that's the value side. On the cost side, can we divide up cost into good cost and bad cost? And let's eliminate the bad spend through optimization. And of course, what remains is what should be there to get the certain amount of value.
I think there's it's actually the last podcast we recorded, which I'm not 100% sure we've released as of the time we record this, but I had a really good chat with Anderson, who recently wrote the FinOps Azure book.
Right.
So we were talking about unit economics, and that topic came up for most of the podcast. Actually, it's one of those ones where you can do a whole podcast just on that bit. How do you guys? Because I think the thing in FinOps, it's easy to know how much it's costing. It's difficult to know what the value is. How do you guys sort of manage that from different applications in KPMG?
So we ask a combination of the technical leads and product. We say, how do you know this application is being used? How do you know it's benefiting the business? Is there a single metric? And usually if we ask them, limit it to one answer, they can tell us. And so from there you say, okay, this is the metric that tells me how this is getting used. That can be the denominator in unit economic. And the numerator, we typically do prod cost. And so we started, it's not very complicated, but I think that's part of the issue is people don't start with unit economics because they think it has to be complicated. So we're pretty simple, but it's simply prod cost over the value metric. And we're looking for a downward trajectory to show that we're getting more efficient month over month.
Yeah.
And sometimes we benchmark. So we'll use the same measure across business units, and we'll be able to see, well, why is this one 40% higher than this? Well, it's because of that. okay, is that an opportunity to get more efficient there? And we've seen that. The other thing we do is you say, well, okay, well, that's only prod. What about non-prod? Well, I think it's important to measure prod versus non-prod. So we have applications where prod is 60% of the total, so non-prod's 40. Okay, that seems to make sense. There are newer applications where non-prod is way bigger than prod.
Yeah.
And so is that because we're doing so much dev work and it's just to be expected and that will change over time? Or is that because there's inefficiency? So those are a couple of ways we use unit economics.
I think it's really interesting as well, actually, when you say changes over time, because I know there's an ISV for us when we do our internal Azure costs. The unit economics in many ways can be quite simple because you can just tie your cloud spend to your product revenue at like the top level unit. And then you can also throw ones like how many users, how many sessions. For us on the FinOps module, it can be how much Azure spend do you manage and that kind of thing. But I think the life cycle of a product kind of comes into play as well, because you'll have certain points where you're in investment mode. So when you talk about your non-production cost, it might be that you sort of invest heavily to have your non-prod environment able to deal with many branches and multiple concurrent deployments, and you're sort of aggressively building new features. But then later in your product cycle, when things stabilize more, you may bring down that parallelism to focus on a fewer, you're more focused on stabilization and performance. So that might change your profile of your spend, but you're kind of spending more on prod than non-prod kind of thing. So it's really interesting, that over time discussion as well. Do you guys have, I guess it's probably different for a big enterprise in a way where each application probably has different units of measure and that kind of thing?
It does. And it's, and it really depends on the application. And if you talk with a person, how do you measure value? And so the answer varies by application, but I want to come back to something you said that was really important. You talked about cloud spend versus revenue as a measure. So on the one hand, that is so simple. That's, sixth grade math. Okay, but plenty of companies aren't doing it. So, and I think if you just start, if an organization starts with unit economics, even if it's that basic, and they continue to look at it and ask questions, it will lead to more detailed permutations that will add more and more value. So just getting started and don't fear failure are two pieces of advice I heard from another podcast, but I fully agree with.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. So you, in your role, and one of the things that's quite interesting is you kind of sound like you sit very much as one of those people in the middle who you're very comfortable talking technical, talking business, talking stakeholder management, talking to project managers. What from your background's been the things that have given you that comfort talking to all those different types of people?
I think it was a couple things. Early on, I had a technical college degree, and then early on I worked in telecom, and the focus of my work was doing financial analysis for emerging technologies. And so it was looking at the impact of new technology on cost or revenue. And so I got very comfortable with that. Now, having said that, even though I majored in electrical engineering, I've never done detailed engineering work. And so what that means is I often have to prepare by doing some research to have technical conversations with people. And being just under basic things, what are IOPS, what is database throughput, things like that, and some of those nuances to make sure that I'm not, an engineer doesn't feel like I'm wasting his or her time.
Yeah, I think that's the secret. It comes back to that continuous learning bit. So anything that's a little bit out of what you've done in the past, you learn it quickly, so you can have those meaningful conversations, isn't it?
It is, and I think there's a book called Hidden Potential by Adam Grant, and one of the key elements of success is being comfortable with discomfort, meaning I'm okay with the discomfort of learning something new And that's a trait that marks successful people. And I think that's really critical for FinOps success.
Yeah, I think that's kind of almost the standard now, isn't it? That you have to be able to deal with that because the technology industry changes every 5 minutes now. And if you're not comfortable, you're probably out of a job maybe in 6 months, the way things are going, isn't it?
Well, it is. And I asked somebody from Microsoft, we were talking about AI, open AI services. And I said, have you ever seen technology and cost profiles change this fast? And the answer was no. And it feels like we're going to end this recording and go look on some industry website and see 3 new OpenAI token models.
Yeah, probably coming out two of them, even just while we've recorded it. What are you going to focus on next then, Dustin, for your learning path? Like, what are the areas you think you need to spend time on?
So I think I need to be disciplined about using AI, Gen AI, to make my own work better.
Mm-hmm.
And so this involves really Microsoft Copilot. So that's personally in terms of making sure I'm more efficient. The optimization analyst I mentioned earlier is doing some really interesting research on how Copilot can make FinOps processes more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, he's taken things like data feeds from either log analytics or Custo query language and uploaded them to Copilot, and it's told him ways to make things better.
That's cool.
In seconds. It's really exciting. So I think looking at how Gen AI can make our team more efficient, but then also just staying abreast of technology changes in AI. Those are a couple of things.
So where are the places you would go to then? So with everything sort of changing so fast these days, where do you go to spot, the learning resources and industry activity that keeps you up to speed?
Yeah, there's an email newsletter I get daily. It's about changes in the AI industry. It doesn't really touch on the FinOps piece. That's just more about being aware of technology. I think for FinOps, the Azure updates page, I check that weekly, and Sangeeta is responsible to report to our collaborative community internally on major updates. That's one. I think there's some people I follow on LinkedIn, but also within the FinOps Foundation Slack, there are channels, tied to certain technologies.
I think if you haven't come across it, actually, Victor Garcia's newsletter is pretty good.
Yes,
it's the FinOps weekly one. It's definitely worth watching out for. I think he's been on one of our podcasts a few months ago as well, just talking to us about kind of where he came up with the idea and how, what it's like building a newsletter in the FinOps world. It was quite cool, actually. That it's a really, really nice guy as well.
Yes, I like Victor. I've interacted with him a little, and he really produces good content. The last category I'll mention is this. I get contacted a lot about looking at tooling demos, and most of those I'm not going to do anything with, but I often accept the meeting, and it's usually a 30-minute meeting because I'm going to be able to provide valuable feedback to that tooling company, and I'm going to learn what they're developing and what's emerging in the market. So that's another way to stay abreast of these changes.
Yeah. It's always good to keep up, isn't it, in that way? So, Dustin, is there any topics that we haven't? I know we're coming up to about 30 minutes now. Is there any topics that you wanted to touch on that I may have forgotten or we might not have mentioned there? I think we've covered most of what we were going to talk about.
I think so. I think I'll refer back again to the episode that really I found very helpful from this series was about Cosmos. And so if your organization has significant Cosmos consumption or you're looking at it, I'd go back and check out that episode. It covered about every lever you could think of to make sure
it was a proper
deep
dive, wasn't it? So just out of curiosity for future podcasts, so we try to have a range of different stuff, but is that the kind of thing you would find really valuable, is if we can get people who can just go deep on a certain kind of Azure resource? Because we can definitely try and do more of that kind of stuff.
I think so, or it could even be a family of services. That was, I mean, if I recall correctly, that episode covered 7 or 8 topics. And so it warranted its own episode. So I think if you have, and it came from a Microsoft SME, or I think an employee.
Yeah, it was one of the guys off the product team. Yeah.
That was invaluable to have inside information. And I say inside, what I mean is this. Microsoft has so much knowledge and so many resources that it can feel hard to navigate.
Mm.
When you have an internal person who knows it and can share that domain in an organized, concise fashion in 30 minutes, it could be extremely valuable.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I think we can definitely do more of that, because I think the one that jumps to mind, we've got a couple of contacts in the function apps team. I think would be a really good one, because we touched on that auto scale and stuff earlier, but things like flex consumption's been out a little while now, but I think it kind of balances that consumption model versus the security and networking benefits that some of the other plans have. So it kind of changes the game a little bit on the way people have done certain workloads. But I think understanding kind of the cost models and the trade-offs would be something quite interesting to get the product team to tell us a bit more about, which would be really cool.
Definitely. And I'll give you another example. I saw in the last week on FinOps Foundation Slack, somebody said, hey, which type of compute should I pick for Azure? Because this was in the Azure channel. So I guess my point is that Azure channel may also be a signal to you of the type of content that may be valuable to people.
Yeah, it's kind of how we do a lot of our community and even our product stuff. Actually, is just kind of listening to what people are finding difficult. I think we're just about at time, Dustin. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. It's been really quite cool listening to your insights. I think if you're up for it, we'd love to have you back sometime, and maybe we can pick, some new topic you've learned or something you're really finding interesting at KPMG that we can talk in a bit more detail about. Is that something we could maybe get you to do in the future, maybe sometime next year?
Yeah, I would be honored to do that and happy to do so.
Awesome. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We'll hopefully, Dustin was telling me, actually, I think we've missed getting some of these podcasts on Spotify, so we'll have to get that sorted out. But this video should be on YouTube very soon. And thank you again, Dustin, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Sorry, one last question. If anybody wants to connect with you as a follow-up, what's the best way for people to get in touch? Or are you okay if people ping you on LinkedIn or something like that?
Yeah, that's the best way. And that's the only social network I use. So please use that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right. So just clicking the end